Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's show. My name is Neda Maria Kaizumi, and we have very special guest today with us, Mr. Nikola Mrkšić. Is co-founder and CEO of PolyAI, a London-based company born out of University of Cambridge Machine Intelligence Lab. Under his leadership, PolyAI has developed human-like voice assistant that automate customer service interactions across languages, industries, and even noisy environments. He holds a PhD in machine learning and natural language processing from Cambridge, and his technical journey includes pioneering work at Vocal IQ, later acquired by Apple, serving as a technical anchor for real-world conversational AI. Named to Forbes 30 Under 30 Europe, Nikola has guided PolyAI through multiple funding rounds and global deployments, transforming science fiction ideas into empathetic infrastructure. Welcome to the show, Mr. Nikola.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's start with your journey. Your path from selling science fiction story in Belgrade to earning a PhD at Cambridge and working on Siri is remarkable. What ignited your passion for conversational AI and led you to this journey?
Yeah, well, look, I think I was always very interested in just artificial intelligence and the pursuit of, what the application of mathematics can do to create, like AI, right? And I think that whole science fiction thing that was mentioned is really all about, my general interest in the subject, which is, I think, not rare among many kind of like researchers that later ended up working on it. I think, as I studied and got into different kind of like areas where maths and, kind of like machine learning could be applied, that's where this stuff started really accelerating, right? Like the capabilities of deep learning, of neural networks, their ability to learn, to be applied for less structured tasks, kind of like to use unsupervised learning to get better at things. And, we train a system to work in one language and it would just magically work in others. It started feeling like magic about around the year kind of like 2012, 13, 14. And after that point, I ended up working for a company, Vocal IQ, that was one of the co-founders was a guy called Steve Young, who I later ended up doing a PhD with at Cambridge. And he's a really famous researcher in speech recognition, and he's been working and pursuing the problem for, I think like 30, 40 years now. So really, they say kind of like stand on the shoulders of giants. Steve is one such giant who really influenced my life, the life of my co-founders, our whole senior research team. He kind of like brought people together for years at Cambridge to work on this stuff when it didn't really seem like we were going to get there in our lifetimes. And, I think like many visionary researchers, he assembled people, resources, vision, mission, and just pushed, right? And then, when deep learning started kicking in, it all went a lot faster than we could have ever believed. And we're still here doing it, so.
Interesting. Well, we talked about vocal IQ and the neural learning that you were trying to implement. Let's talk about the gaps. What gaps or frustration was there out that you tried to address it?
Yeah, well, look, if you think to like 10 years ago and think in a pan-European context, one thing that really frustrated me was, on the one hand, we had technology that was getting to a level that was really formidable, right? It would work in English decently well, not as well as today, but it worked, right? You could build a functional system that you could hold a conversation with. And one thing that I always just found really weird, and it motivated the name, Poly, as in polyglot, right, for PolyAI, was I'm Serbian, right? Serbian's a relatively small language. If you count the whole language area with Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, it's about 20 million people. Still not that small, right? It's an old language, it's a rich language. But I could understand that with our economy and stuff, there wouldn't be a lot of funding for it, right? But you look at the country of France, it's, I think, the fifth or sixth largest economy on the planet. You look at Germany, which is one up, wherever France is. So really large economies with big world languages, especially French. And yet most people up until recently, and even to this day, have not really interacted with voice agents. And we would tell them we're building that, and people kind of nod and then be like, well, wait, what do you mean, right? And that revealed to me the first kind of global discrepancy, right? America has had very bad but very widespread IVR systems, so interactive voice response systems, for a very long time. We're talking like 10, 15 years. And they've learned to hate them. They are functional in that they do some of the things that you couldn't do with press one for that and two for that. For very large companies, think like a Comcast or Verizon, it helps them get the number of agents from 20,000 to 14,000. Hence, they were deployed at a time when they cared about cost, and they stayed ever since because it's a cost saving that you just couldn't ignore. But they were always deployed in a way that would trade off customer experience for cost savings, right? And that just became the norm where if you decided to go down that route, the application of the kind of technology that I worked for my whole life is always a bad thing for the customer. And that's like, I don't like that, right? And now, where I think we're lucky in Europe is we're starting to deploy, and like basically those things were really expensive to deploy, even though they were clunky and bad, like to get them to be at all functional and somewhat operating, even in American English, it would take millions of investments, like years of work. It was really, really hard, right? Now we've gotten the technology to the point where out of the box, it can work in 2 weeks, and it can work way better. You can hold conversations that are much more natural, interactive. They can have a conversation the way you and I are now having a conversation, just unstructured, free form. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You hand off to a human agent the same way that a human, when they run out of their depth, will hand you off to a tier 2 agent and higher up, right? So that's a very familiar motion as long as that transition is seamless and the context is passed. We don't even mind it that much with humans. We mind it a little bit, but it has to be done, it has to be done, right? Now, we're lucky now in Europe in that we can deploy it to a consumer base that's not had the history of those bad experiences. And because of that, they're much more accepting of these experiences today, right? Now, it's funny because like that was and is true still. But also the systems have gotten so good and so natural that often people don't really know if it's an AI or not. But we still see anecdotal differences where Americans will ask much more often, hey, is this human or AI, right? Because they've kind of caught on that that's better. Whereas in Europe, when it works well, it just gives you a chance to delight, and it's like, oh, wow, that was a really, really good agent, thank you. And sometimes they realize it's AI 5 minutes through and go like, oh, wow, this, okay. And we love hearing those calls because, then we're that first experience. That means that we've done our part towards the general population not hating this technology because it will eventually make all of our experiences way better.
Absolutely. And I have tried PolyAI voice assistant. I think it's quite very much natural. So it's hard to notice actually that it is AI assistant. But we talked about the commercial points, and I would like to ask you about the biggest technical and operational challenges that you encounter in earlier stages.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's like many ways. Like it's kind of like a company building a website for the very first time without there being a lot of websites out there, right? So you kind of have to figure out what are you going to do with it? What is it supposed to do in a certain situation? And then, you need to evolve it to make it better and better over time. So we tend to do the best when people are open-minded and flexible. They launch it, see how people interact, and then very quickly iterate. So we tend to find that the most kind of like the best indicator of success of a project and rapid success and quick ROI is how well we align the teams on our end and on the client end to build that kind of like center of competence for using the platform and for thinking about this new channel that they're creating on the client side. Because if the right subject matter expert who can pull in the right members of that team, be it customer experience, people who take care of knowledge bases, IT, of course, for technical integrations on the telephony and chat side, and on the kind of like CRM knowledge base side, and whatever other third-party systems we need to use and integrate with. That's what makes the project flow smoothly, seamlessly. I think really strong project management skills are essential on both the vendor side and the client side. And the better we can communicate and organize this aircraft carrier that we're building, the better we can kind of like reliably drive it to a successful outcome. And then, many things can get in the way, right? Like technical integrations, third-party systems where you thought you had APIs but you don't, or places where people don't expect that another third-party vendor might ask them to upgrade to a different package in order to provide an integration needed to do a task automatically. Telephony issues where people just aren't sure how they implemented something, or a piece of the system wasn't touched for years, and now it's almost unclear who did it, when they did it, and what for. All the way to kind of like old systems of record, APIs without documentation, complex compliance procedures. Not to put people off from doing any of this, right? But you got to have strong enterprise chops and thick skin to kind of like see these projects through.
It's kind of like typical AI implementation problems. Absolutely understand. Well, one of the beauty of PolyAI, which I like, is to handle messy, multi-intent speech effectively. And I know that to leverage that, you're using models like Raven and Old. Can you explain how these models enable agents to be effective in this environment?
One thing that is, I think, distinct for PolyAI versus all of our competitors is that most of them build with technology provided by OpenAI, by Anthropic, and other LLM labs, right? And at some point, you're always using other people's technology to build, right? At like a certain level. Now, we're different in that this is a spin-out from a university that then built our own models repeatedly. And the moment that LLMs started operating at the level of performance that they are today, we started training our own, right? Now, at that point already, we had close to 100 million data points of carefully designed conversations between humans and machines that were really, really good. And they're really hard to build and create, kind of like what we talked about at the start. It took months and months of efforts to use less powerful models than the modern LLM to still have that fluid conversation. It was a lot of effort, and we were a lot more careful about where we commit to doing something based on whether we thought we could do it or not, because we could do less than what we can do now. But then when LLMs came in, we were able to start tuning them with our data. Now, there are really two ways to deal with implementing an application with a modern LLM, right? One is that you prompt your way around its behavior, right? So if you use ChatGPT or any of them, in text how they're pretty verbose, right? And then you can be like, use fewer words, use more words, or use more words if you have to, but try to use less words, right? So it gets a bit confusing, and it's confusing for the LLM the same way that it's confusing for us. So a lot of these companies start with one line, then a second, then a third, and they write these huge prompts that the LLM has to absorb, and they're confusing, and they just about make it work for a demo. And when it goes into production, they start just appending things into this one prompt, right? And that the equivalent would be you get a human agent in front of you, and let's assume that you could freeze time, lock yourself in a room with them for a month, and just blurt out everything they need to do, right? Now, the LLM is very powerful, and imagine that that human can remember everything. In their head, when they're responding to a question, you might have said 7 things that are slightly contradictory, right? And if you've done it that way, it can be really difficult to just operate in that way, right? Because you just keep saying things that might refer to one thing or the other. And if you don't specify it in almost like very strict legal language, it gets really difficult for the LLM to do all this, right? An alternative approach is to have prompts that are simpler, but an LLM with much more common sense around these kinds of conversations, because something like GPT-5 or 4, it's trying to be like a really good kind of like all things to all people, right? So it's there to do things like, question answering. It's there to support you in that voice conversation. It's there to do deep analysis on the performance of a stock based on, the Google search you did before. So when you want to use especially smaller models that are fast and have lower latency, those large LLMs, their reliability shrinks massively. And if you don't train it with data that is specific to your task, they lose a lot of that reliability. And then what we call hallucinations happens a lot more. And for us, having our own models means that we basically start fine-tuning these models and refine them so that we can have really low latency but high reliability things for customer service. Similarly, we have a lot of data that is speech recognition training specifically for the phone, right? And the phone is a messy, messy channel. We speak differently when we speak on the phone than when we record ourselves in a studio, right? Or, we sound different to TV presenters that might have been used to train a general speech recognizer, right? And with annotated data. So having data, again, that is specific to phone-based conversations means that we can do a lot better at understanding someone who's on a train speaking and going like, hey, I need to renew my prescription, right? And they said that with voices in the back, with the phone encoding that is a lower bit rate than most audio that people train with. So kind of like that specificity to the task that we apply our systems to allows us to get models that are much more reliable and highly accurate for these tasks. And then we have to do less work to polish and polish and polish to get them to be good for a specific customer's use case.
Thank you for describing that in detail. I'm sure it is very beneficial for those who are interested in this conversation. When I was searching about you on the internet, I found that you've said great conversational AI understands intent without user repetition and adapts across contexts, which I agree. How does that translate into better customer satisfaction in real-world environment like contact centers?
Yeah, well, look, I think if you think of speaking to an automated system, if you called in and a very human-like voice picks up and says, maybe they even know who you are, and I go like, hi, Neda Maria, how can I help you today, right? And you have you are frustrated. You're like, hey, I called about, replacing my internet router like 3 days ago, and you told me to be here today. It's now 4 p.m. and no one's here, and you keep going and you tell me everything, right? And I go, I can definitely help you with the problem. Like, so, okay, they were supposed to come on Monday. And then I start asking you, I need one piece of information, right? Well, let's say you provide that piece of information. Maybe like you confirm your address or I verify you. And then imagine that system just going and asking you question by question, 10 questions where you might have provided the answer to it in that paragraph, right? So a smarter conversational system will look back at the history of the conversation at all times and think, all right, I've heard that. Now I've verified your identity. Now I'm going to go through these 6 steps automatically. Click. Next thing I need is this, right? Maybe I ask you another question. At that point, the answer is that, right? Now, a human would struggle to do all that. A human, in reality, would interrupt you, potentially, when you start speaking initially and just go like, wait, hold on. First, I need to confirm your identity. Right. So it's always a question of design, but the better the model supporting a voice agent is, the more it can get out of trouble just by being super intelligent and going, okay, like I've heard these 5 things, I'm going to apply them logically and consistently through the conversation. And that basically means carrying that context and, thinking about it, reasoning about it all the way through the conversation.
Very nice. Thank you. Let's shift the topic from the technical part to the responsible AI, because that's obviously on discussion everywhere in Europe because of AI Act. And your product is such that when someone calls and get AI assistant, it sounds very natural. So how does PolyAI win the trust in enterprise deploying voice assistant at this scale?
Yeah, well, look, I think that whether you disclose that something is AI or not is both a design decision and something that needs to comply with the local legislation, right? So according to the AI Act, you have to show transparency around being an automated system. So the way that we do it in many of our deployments, to both kind of like, especially in the EU, to align both with GDPR and the AI Act, this call will be recorded for training and quality purposes. It will initially be handled by Nikola, PolyAI's virtual agent. Ringtone, Nikola, the AI picks up, has a conversation with you, right? So the trust there is really all about knowing that either as you speak with the system, it understands what you're saying. If it doesn't, or if you, for whatever reason, be it your own preference, your own desire to speak with a human rather than with AI, if you choose to do that, our belief is, and again, this is very controllable in the platform, and it's dependent on the customer requirements. But my personal belief is that you should never, ever hold someone in a conversation with AI against their will, because we historically think of these experiences as bad precisely because people created these and often deliberately created, these self-service labyrinths that were there to just keep you away from speaking with a human. Now, if you're going to do that, you might as well come clean and say, listen, you're the kind of customer that we don't care about, and taking your call is not worth our time. Depending on the culture, may go down well in some, not well in others, but it is the truth. It is how they feel, right? People get it, right? Now, if you give people a choice, which is, look, I've invested heavily to build an AI system that's really, really good to serve you as a customer, will you please give it a shot, right? And alternatively, I'll hand you off to the human line. The waiting time is 7 minutes. Because that's probably true. That's probably why you're implementing AI, because you don't have enough people, especially maybe during some certain parts of the day, think like busy times or busy periods during the year, like, I don't know, Christmas for retailers. If you come clean like that, we tend to find that people opt into an AI conversation, then get delighted by how good it is, and they go like, wow, look, this company is, following the times. It's invested heavily in me, the customer, by putting this in front of me, and it's better than a human. We have many use cases where we perform better with an AI system than the human cohort ever did. And they include very difficult things sometimes, things like bereavement and inheritance calls, where our initial suggestion was, let's hand off to a human without even asking consumers whether they want to speak to an AI or not. And in a few situations, it was just the availability of humans was such that we ended up having those conversations, and we realized that if you had, I don't know, a parent, right, and you're calling to cancel their subscriptions, to change the name on the utility bill and on, I don't know, a bank thing or a water bill, by the time you're having their fifth call, and even if the human is the most empathetic human in the world, right, you don't really want to have another conversation about it, right? You don't want to do anything. Ideally, you'd click a button and it will be done, right? But that tech hasn't been built yet, so somebody has to do it, right? So weirdly, or not weirdly, I think, we found that people actually prefer the transactional nature of speaking with AI, because AI is not another human being sharing or not sharing their pain, speaking about it. Sometimes the right answer is to say something about it too, and maybe they want to talk. And we've seen cases of people going into great depth talking about a parent or someone in their family who passed away. But in other cases, they're just like, yeah, I want to change the name of the bill. The name is now this. Thanks, goodbye. Right? And with a human, there's always this like, oh, I'm so sorry. Did you ask a question or not? And I've since spoken with like behavioral scientists who work on this, and it's a really difficult thing to build the right talk track for a human, right? That would make for you to make that distinction around to go into more detail or not. And we've just seen examples of where an AI system gets client satisfaction that is overall much higher than a human cohort for some of these difficult calls.
Absolutely. And what is interesting for me, I just got curious as you were speaking, what type of industry are mainly your customers? Is it more like the hospital and retail shops, or what kind of industry are the main customer?
Really all over. We are a horizontal company where I think 5 different verticals internally, the way we're organized, dominate. One is financial services. The second one is healthcare. Then we've got retail and logistics as one group, travel and hospitality as another one. And then the fifth one is kind of like utilities and the public sector, where, it's like gas, electricity companies, government entities picking up calls. And it's really kind of like the 5 clusters are themselves quite rich. A bank in Europe governed by the European Central Bank is different to a large insurance company in America. Both are hard and complicated and subject to a lot of regulation. Or, healthcare in America versus healthcare in the UK is not the same thing. And then, kind of like you've got less regulated industries like hospitality, retail, logistics, and their, seasonality reigns supreme, where for retail and logistics and for utilities, they just have periods where, maybe an outage happened and you get 20 times more calls than on a normal day. No human contact center can cope with that. Or in the case of retail, they'll get like spikes of, traffic during certain times of the year, where again, it's really difficult to provision the extra human labor that is trained and ready to take those calls and to process them well. Whereas, for say hospitality, a lot of the calls we take are to do with making money, taking, appointments and reservations. Same is true in healthcare, right? Where, if they miss that phone call, people may go elsewhere, right? Or they might go and book online through an online travel agency. And if they do that, well, the hotel loses 20% of the booking value to, I don't know, Booking.com or Expedia. So they're very incentivized to meet the customer in the channel of their preference. And funnily, I think around half of the hotel rooms in America are still booked by phone. And that blew my mind because I had never done it before. So.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. As a leader, what advice would you share with other AI founders about balancing rapid innovation, customer empathy, and operational resilience?
I think it's to be customer centric, right? I think that for us technologists, it's always tempting to try to build like a better thing, but really you don't know what better means until you know what people are going to use it for. So you need to find that product market fit, and that really is listening to your customers and listening to your customers, and then more of that. Everything else flows downstream from that, like, what kind of business you need to build, what you need to do to support those customers, what you need to build to support them further and to deliver more value. But it all starts and ends with the customer.
Thank you. Reflecting on your journey so far, what has been the most unexpected lesson you've learned in building technology that truly converses like a human?
What I think is really interesting is that there's a lot of kind of like quasi wisdom communicated to startups around, hiring the right people, managing people. Overall, I think that whole like piece is completely exaggerated, right? And that people kind of like early on, and I know many entrepreneurs that went through this. You hire people, then you manage, you do a lot of one-on-ones, you take up a lot of your calendar with trying to support people in their growth. And the truth is, much like those customers and use cases that are good or not, people will either kind of like fit or they won't, right? And you have so many kind of like degrees of freedom that you're solving around that you can't really solve on your own. It'll just happen to you. So you might as well just make progress on the things that matter most and obsess over that, and everything else will come together. So with people, and this is like, I'm a very scientific person for whom this didn't make sense, but now it does, is you have to trust your gut, right? You're building a team. You have co-founders, early team people that kind of like form the culture of a company. That culture is everything, because people who are aligned with your culture, right, are the ones that will be very productive and will then strengthen the culture and enrich it. And they might change it a little bit, right? Each new person has something new to contribute, right? But their ability to fit well and be productive will depend on parameters, what is important to them, what is important to the people you have right now. So that whole thing will evolve, and then kind of like nurturing it later is really important. But trusting your gut around things is more important, because you sometimes won't be able to explain like an intuition that you have, and you'll have a sense that it's right. Whenever that gut activates, you should probably follow wherever it's pointing you, because it's not really, I used to think of sentences like the one I just said as pointless self-help blabber, right? But actually, you're just unable to clearly articulate the factors that are like pointing you that way. But if you're living and breathing the process of building that company and investing every waking minute in it, you're probably doing a decent job of like collating all the factors, and you should just kind of like, there's a reason you're in the spot that you are, which is to make decisions, right? And you should think long and hard about them, but equally you shouldn't be afraid of following your intuition for things where you don't have the full data to explain that decision to everyone, because the alternative is like indecision. It's not making decisions or not making them fast enough. It's then kind of like just slowing you down, and then you're floundering instead of, getting a lot better every day.
I totally agree. I have a favorite question in this show. So take out the business, family issues, whatever, and you're given unlimited resources in the world. What kind of AI project would you like to do personally as a
This
hobby?
no, this one because
This one. Okay.
no. I mean, the thing is like with the amount of money we raised and are able to raise, I effectively already have unlimited resources, right? And I'm not doing this to pay bills or to get by in life. I'm doing it because I want to, right? And that's true for many people in the company, right? We're fortunate in that AI is as hot as it is today, that venture capital flocks and invests, and sure, we have to make money, but that making money is just an indicator of the impact we're having in the world, right? So we can be flexible on things like payment terms, etc., because we are that well capitalized. To me, I want to show that AI can make everything better, right? And like what I mean with PolyAI is to show that we can help every company become the best version of itself using artificial intelligence. In doing that, we will also grow artificial intelligence to be of the kind that we want it to be for a better humanity, right? So that whenever you want something, you'll have this incredible interface to reach whatever provider of services and things that you want, thus making your life a lot better and creating in it an AI that is very human-centric, able to talk to people and do all that. So to me, like that pursuit is why I'm doing it, but also what I'd do if, money wasn't really an object, because it isn't really, right? But yeah, I think other than that, places where I would deploy AI, or if I were doing something else, you told me that I couldn't do poly AI. I think there are quite a few places, problems in the world where we've not done enough work and put enough research and capability behind them. Say one example that I often discuss with my wife is, I feel like there's been quite a limited amount of research on, for example, which medicine pregnant women can have during their pregnancies, right? And the default position is don't do that because we don't know, and don't do that because we don't know, right? And the alternative is seen often as just like, oh well, it would be unethical to experiment, of course, right? But what's interesting, and I have some examples of it, but not nowhere near as much, and I would go and work on it if I had a different life and couldn't do poly AI. There are countries where the recommendations are different, which means that effectively you've had some experiments with, people eating a certain kind of food or not eating a certain kind of food, right? So you could do the statistical analysis to draw a conclusion, and then either it's actually true that pregnant women should not consume that thing, in which case let's please propagate it to the whole world through like the World Health Organization, or it's being enforced in a bunch of places needlessly, in which case let's propagate it through the World Health Organization and help women have a slightly better time during pregnancy. So that's just one example, and broadly it extends all the way through to generalized preventative healthcare and medicine, because what I am flabbergasted by is our fastest growing segment is healthcare in the United States, right? 17% of American GDP goes on to healthcare. And yeah, if you're loaded in America, you have the best healthcare in the world, right? But the average person in America doesn't have better healthcare than the average person in the EU, right? Despite lower spending, right? So if we could channel our kind of like R&D and create a better system for it, I think with what we're spending on healthcare already, we would have like a far happier, healthier planet, right? We're probably spending more than we need to have that level of best healthcare that very wealthy people in certain Western countries have. We could probably do it at scale for everyone if we put our mind to it and distribute it in the right way. Again, there are different interests, and it's complicated, but that's something that I think AI has a huge role to play in. And obviously, I hope we get to see as much of it as possible in the next few years and decades.
Thank you. First of all, that confirms that you have your dream job because you really like PolyAI, which I like that. And also, I really like the way that you watch the world around and dare to do something with the problems. I think that's quite commendable. Thank you for sharing that. Well, last but not least, what does Beyond the Tech mean to you?
Ideally, we're all just look very different and creative, right? I think our ability to do raw work in the age of AI is becoming less and less valuable, right? So I think it's our ability to get creative and to break the model and to do something unexpected is where we as humans in this combined human AI workforce that is slowly emerging, like it is our ability to be that investigator at the fringe that will shine and make us the best versions of ourselves, and that hybrid workforce the best version of itself, right? I think the other thing is just really like the empathy and care, right? If you thought of as like humans and AI as just equal but different constituents of the economy and society, right? Like we can relate to each other and we want to relate to each other. It's our need as human beings, right? So I think that if we can really unlock value and productivity through technology in the way that we hope, it should hopefully give us a lot of time back to just be better human beings to each other. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to do a lot of thinking about in the coming period, because it's been this like point of discussion from Marxist times onwards. It's kind of like if you had unlimited like means of production, right, what would happen with, like, would we all just be doing art and discussing philosophy, or what is our meaning going to be? I think that we're going to struggle with that, but it also presents a big opportunity for us in the next stage, where the dark scenarios that we just kind of like go into like very simple pursuits and we just do kind of like high gratification, low effort tasks versus like finding a way to reach a higher level of consciousness through it. Now it sounds fluffy. I think by nature it's hard to imagine what the future society will look like, but I think that us moving beyond the tech means that we have to move beyond ourselves as we currently see ourselves, and that's going to be really hard to imagine and quite exciting, actually.
That was very well said. Well, Mr. Nikola, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation for me, and I'm sure our listeners will like it very much. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, and wish you a great day. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nikola Mrkšić.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.